We've been spending the last month putting a whole bunch of new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros through various tests and comparisons, and I've also been using my own personal 16-inch M1 Max model at my house basically every day, and unfortunately, we've noticed quite a few problems over this past month. So in this video, I'm not only going to cover those problems, but I'm also going to provide solutions for the ones that actually have them or may have them soon. But don't get me wrong, I absolutely love my new 16-inch MacBook Pro for various reasons, and to be completely honest, it's the best Apple device purchase I've made in years. But nevertheless, there are some problems that I want to be fully transparent about because they are very real, and some of them have some interesting fixes that you seriously need to know about. So let's get right into problem number one. One of the things I was the most excited about with these new MacBook Pros is the new 120Hz ProMotion feature, since I do a lot of web browsing at home and I love how smooth it is on my iPhone 13 Pro Max. But to this day, both Safari and Chrome are still limited to 60 Hz scrolling, which is very unfortunate on these new MacBook Pros. Now recently, Apple released a new version of their Safari technology preview, which claims that it supports 120Hz scroll animations, but everyone on the internet says that it still doesn't work. So hopefully Apple is going to be working on a software fix soon, because they did intentionally show off Safari 120Hz scrolling in their own keynote video, so they have to add it soon. Now getting into the second problem, I recently upgraded my internet at my house with CenturyLink Fiber, which now supports speeds up to 940 gigabits per second, both up and down. And while testing the wired Ethernet LAN speeds using a QNAP gigabit Ethernet adapter, I got very close to the full speeds, which was very impressive. However, when I tested out the Wi-Fi, it seemed to always be slower than on my iPhone 13 Pro, no matter the location within my home, up to a difference of around 200 megabits per second in certain spots, which is a bit disappointing since I need the faster speeds on my MacBook, not on my iPhone. And upon doing some research, I found out that the new MacBook Pros actually have slightly slower Wi-Fi speeds compared to older MacBooks. As you can see, the maximum PHY data rate for AX Wi-Fi 6 is actually 100 megabits per second slower than the AC Wi-Fi 5 data rate on older Macs. But making it worse, the Wi-Fi 5 speeds are significantly slower at 866 megabits per second compared to 1300 on older Macs. So if you're still using a Wi-Fi 5 router, you'll likely see a downgrade in terms of Wi-Fi speeds until you upgrade to a new Wi-Fi 6 model. Moving on to the third problem, it's gotta do with the new notch. Now, while I've personally gotten used to it and I honestly don't mind the look at all, especially since it gives us the super immersive display with thin bezels, there are a couple of issues that you might experience thanks to the notch. First of all, I've noticed that in some games like Rocket League that have important UI elements in the top center of the screen, the notch can actually dig in and cover important info at times. And other than that, there are actually some apps that have many menu bar items that will be hidden underneath the notch, like Quinn from Snazzy Labs showed us in a recent tweet. And finally, if you have a lot of menu bar items on the right side, like we do when we run our tests and comparisons, like for example to show CPU temperature and fan speed, some of them will actually disappear if they get too close to the notch, which is very annoying. But in my daily use, I haven't really noticed it myself since I don't really need to do any of that at home, but it is something that you could potentially run into yourself. For problem number 4, I want to mention that even after a year of the original M1 Max being out in the wild, we still have a lot of software and apps that don't have full native Apple Silicon support. In terms of video editing using Final Cut Pro, we've had to replace some of our motion VFX plugins with ones that may have missing features because they just aren't supported anymore. Now, of course, I know this is fully up to the developers, but it's already been a year and a half since Apple announced announce the transition, and this kind of stuff can really slow down these new insanely fast MacBook Pros. For example, the open source Blender rendering program still doesn't support Metal, which makes rendering much slower than it is on Windows laptops with traditional graphics cards that use CUDA or whatever else. And then of course, there are issues with unsupported audio plugins in Logic Pro, so it sucks to see that the transition still has a lot more work before it's fully polished. For problem number 5, this is perhaps the most annoying thing that I've experienced at home, and that's actually display blooming. As we all know, the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros come with new mini LED displays that can get insanely bright while also having incredibly dark levels of contrast. However, since I don't personally have a TV in my home, I resort to using my MacBook Pro to watch movies, which is great because of the new and improved speakers, but if the display isn't pointed directly at you, then the blooming becomes noticeable and it's actually quite distracting. And the thing I didn't expect was that I would notice the blooming in shots that are more dimly lit and hazy, like many of the shots from the movie Dune. And it just gets so much worse when you're viewing it from the side, and especially if your eyes are looking down at the display, which may happen when you're sitting upright on your couch to maybe eat snacks or grab a drink or whatever else. So with that said, I actually have to be intentional about how I place my MacBook Pro when watching something to avoid blooming, which is a bit disappointing. But the display still looks so much better than the previous ones, so it's still worth it. For problem number 6, we've been noticing that the viewing angles in general aren't as good as they were before, causing the display to look a bit dimmer from the side and the top. This is likely due to the switch to the new mini LED display tech, since it has more layers that are required to make it look great with all of the local dimming zones and everything else, which also makes it look a tad bit more cool toned compared to before. But once again, when you're looking straight at it, there are no issues at all, and most people likely won't even notice when looking from the side. For problem number 7, we've been suffering from that new memory leak issue that has been messing with the performance of the new MacBook Pros, especially when editing off of a NAS storage system, causing a bunch of lag and other issues. So to quickly explain this problem, the RAM that usually gets cleared and swapped by your apps just stops getting cleared and it keeps filling up, starving the rest of the system and slowing down performance, as you can see in this clip, which shows Windows Server using up a massive 33 gigabytes of RAM on my iMac Pro. But thankfully, some users are reporting that the latest beta version of macOS Monterey has fixed this problem. But of course, not everyone has access to the beta or wants to upgrade to it, so hopefully the public release gets this fixed soon. Now moving on to problem number 8, the 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro actually throttles the performance quite a bit compared to the 16-inch model, which Apple didn't mention anything about in their keynote. For example, the GPU clock speed on the 14-inch will not go higher than around 1136 megahertz, no matter what. Even if the temperatures are cool and you're plugged into power. It's literally a hard cap by Apple, since we weren't able to get more than 35 watts of power flowing to the 14-inch M1 Max's GPU, compared to as high as 43 watts on the 16-inch model, which can get up to around the full 1300 megahertz clock speed, which is around 14% higher than on the 14-inch. Which of course leads to faster performance across the board, as you can see in the GFX Bench graphics test. And based on all of the other tests that we ran, the biggest performance difference we saw was when we tested Cinebench and 3D Mark Wildlife at the same time, and the 16-inch ended up being 37% faster, which is a huge jump. But don't get me wrong, the 14-inch is still more than powerful enough for almost everyone, and is by far the fastest laptop in its size and weight class, which is why Max recently returned his 16-inch and stuck to the 14-inch for the awesome portability. So definitely check out his video on that if you haven't already. For problem number 9, this finally brings us into gaming support. I've already created 2 gaming reviews using both the M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros, and they gave us very impressive performance, at least for the games that actually worked. Games with macOS ports ran very well, like Diablo 3, StarCraft 2, Dota 2, and Minecraft, but some games just didn't perform that well, like CSGO. But the worst part is that boot camp support is now gone, so you have to resort to using apps like Parallel 17 and Crossover 21 to play Windows games. And while they in fact do an excellent job, there is still so much translation going on that it greatly slows down their performance compared to playing native games. For example, we had to turn the settings way down to get Grand Theft Auto 5 to run at 60 FPS on the M1 Max MacBook Pro, which, keep in mind, is a very expensive machine. But playing World of Warcraft, which is native, was amazing, easily getting over 120 FPS with the settings turned way up. And Matthew Moniz even showed that it was almost as fast as a 3080 mobile GPU laptop, which I don't think anybody was expecting. But the issue is that there are barely any native games, and even with Crossover 21, DirectX 12 Windows games aren't supported yet, so you're pretty much limited to older AAA game titles. But the worst part of all is that games that use kernel-based anti-cheat won't run at all. So you simply can't play any online games like Call of Duty Vanguard, and we're not even sure how long it's gonna take before they finally can. But thankfully, there is a chance we could get boot camp support in the future, since Qualcomm had a secret exclusivity deal with Windows on ARM, which might be why boot camp support disappeared. And since we know Nvidia is working on an ARM-based gaming laptop, we should hopefully get anti-cheat support for ARM chips in the future. And finally, for problem number 10, while the microphone quality has definitely improved compared to older MacBooks, it sometimes sounds a bit dull or muted when you have some background noise in the room. So it almost seems like it's overcompensating for the noise, therefore cutting out the high end of the vocal range compared to older MacBooks. So just hear it for yourself.
And now let's compare the webcams. I have both opened up right here, and I'm gonna switch between them as far as the video and the audio so you guys can compare which one looks better and which one sounds better.
Now there is a chance that this is a bug that can be fixed in the future, but it's definitely a bit odd to hear right now. But don't worry, this is a very minimal issue, and it's unlikely to bother a lot of people since the quality is already so much better than basically any other Windows laptop microphone system out there. So with all that said, those are the problems that we've noticed over the past month, which is actually quite impressive since it could be a lot worse. And keep in mind that a lot of these have to do with software, so they can get fixed with updates, and they'll get fixed over time when we get better Apple Silicon support, which is very reassuring. But if you've been noticing any of those issues for yourself, go ahead and comment your thoughts down below, and be sure to click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.